Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Velvet Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry. It is my pleasure to have with us today Sandeep Desai, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Unilever Ice Cream, now called Magnum. Sandeep, pleasure to have you and welcome.
Thank you, Radu. Good to be on your podcast. I've heard many podcasts of yours in the past and fellow supply chain leaders. So always good to connect with you.
Thanks for the kind words. So maybe as a setup and brief introductions to our audience. So first and foremost, Unilever Ice Cream, now called Magnum, is the largest ice cream company in the world with a revenue of 8.4 billion. It has some iconic names that a lot of us savor, like Magnum, Cornetto, Ben Jerry's. It serves 2.5 billion consumers every year. And from sourcing vanilla in the Madagascar to keeping freezers running in tropical heat, let's just say that it's a fairly complex supply chain to run. Sandeep is in charge of that. He has the pleasure and responsibility of that. So he's the Chief Supply Chain Officer. His team operates in over 60 countries, serving billions of smiles, cold, creamy, and right on time. He's spent a long time with Unilever. He's more than 20, 25 years all along with the company, with the group, with a multitude of roles, worked across different continents. And maybe let's start there, Sandeep. And I want to ask you specifically, in your long career with Unilever, tell us one or two key inflection points that made the most difference to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks. I would say there's probably three major inflection points I would class in my career. I think one is, probably states the most obvious, but having a multi-lane career in supply chain is really important. So I had I did procurement, I did deep stints in manufacturing, and then also a stint in planning. And I think having three of the four, let's call it functional lane expertise, rounds you off as a leader. So whilst I don't classify it as one single inflection point, I would say any responsible supply chain leader that wants to develop into a career, I think having a multi-lane career would be one big thing, I would say. If I make it much more sharper now and more maybe impactful, I think taking a job where you have to do a turnaround, I think is deeply important. And I had a very troublesome factory I had to lead in South Africa, and taking on that job, three of my predecessors prior to me had been asked to leave. I was then the fourth appointee in a relatively short period of time. And, I remember many people telling me, we don't know whether to say congratulations or commiserations. And I took that role on fully. And for me, firstly, I think factory roles teach you a lot. So any factory role, whether it's a turnaround or not, I think when you lead very large, diverse teams and you deal with all kinds of diversity, educational diversity, cultural diversity, in South Africa, racial diversity, gender diversity, but even diversity in education. You deal with people that have a doctorate degree and some that, I've just done basic high school. Trying to motivate large numbers of people towards a common objective of creating a world-class factory, I think really brings out deep leadership skills in you on how do you drive that change. And I think doing that then in a transformational context where you have to transform, the thing in transformation is things are always going to be vague and unclear. You're not going to have all the answers. So how do you do decision-making under uncertainty? How do you manage both your internal organization, meaning the organization you are leading, but also the broader organization, that they give you confidence in the plan and that they subscribe to your plan, I think is vitally important. And then speed and execution of decision-making. There's a very famous saying, not made by me, but I don't mind, using it, is even making a wrong decision is better than making no decision. And you learn that when you're in a turnaround and a transformation kind of thing. And so for me, not only the stint in manufacturing, but also this transformation was a big inflection point because it brought about different facets of my leadership. I think I became a more multi-dimensional leader where I was probably much more linear, if I can call it, in my thought process prior to that role. So I would class that as my second inflection point. And then third, working, I've had the pleasure of working in 3 different continents, Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe. I think every time you move in different geographies, you learn different things. It's the same business, it's the same products, like you say, whether it's Magnum's the same everywhere, Ben & Jerry's the same everywhere. But how you make that, sell it, do it in different contexts, where the context is different culturally, but the methods of doing business are different, maturity of the ecosystem completely different, market to market. And that adaptability of working in very different markets with very different circumstances, still leading very large teams, I would say is a third inflection point for me. Because again, it keeps honing and harnessing your adaptability as a leader and how you can drive that. And so for me, I would say those are the 3 things that I would class as proper inflection points that help me shape who I am today.
No, some very powerful lessons. Now, talking a bit about the journey from Unilever to now Unilever Ice Cream, because ultimately it is a spin-off and it is a bit of a mixed emotions, I suspect. So maybe tell us a little bit how it felt for you as spending 20 years with Unilever, many of your, or all of your employees and colleagues, and then let's talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, indeed. I spent almost 24 years now with Unilever. And I can still remember very clearly when I found out that Unilever was going to spin off the ice cream business. And, we now call it the Magnum Ice Cream Company. And it was a very weird moment for me. I would say bittersweet even doesn't quite describe it. I think weird is probably the best word. Why do I say weird? I think because it was quite an emotional transition. And I think, I've had a close death in my family where I lost my father when I was quite young. I touch wood, have not had a divorce, but it felt like a death in the family or a divorce is what you would go through. So there's a deep sense of fear, a deep sense of, I don't know if I want this or I like it or I don't. You're going through all these emotions in your mind. And I would be lying to you if I didn't say I went through every single one of those. There was also a sense of excitement, don't get me wrong, because you're like, hey, this is the chance to create something standalone, something new. In Unilever today, I would be part of a big executive leadership team that then runs the supply chain in the future. The buck stops with you, yeah, like you say, for an 8.4. So there are elements of excitement too in that journey, but there are elements of deep introspection, as I would call it. And that's what made it very weird. And I think for me, the big aha moment for me, Radu, was I had to understand what was going on in my own mental and emotional psyche before I could lead the, 9,000 people that I lead in the supply chain. And having to understand my mindset shift, deal with my own emotions, come to terms with this is the decision and what is my place in that decision. What do I want to do? Do I want to do this thing in ice cream and become the chief supply chain officer of the Magnum Ice Cream Company? Do I want to try and stay with Unilever? Or do I want to even go outside and look outside? What do I want to do? Going through that entire thing in my mind and being at complete peace was really important. I had to really get my own head and stuff in order so that I could be a responsible leader to the 9,000 people. And I think the biggest thing I pick up, it's now a year since the announcement happened. And I talked to you a year after that whole journey has happened in my mind and in my heart. But I quickly realized that until I make peace with it myself, I can't lead and communicate authentically. And if I can't do that, then I actually don't deserve to be in the job. And I should, give it to somebody else or make way or whatever. But the minute I got that right, I was able to communicate town hall upon town hall, market after market, and what people always came back to me and said is, Sandeep, you were authentic in your message. We felt, I think people feel and sense bullshit a mile away.
Yeah.
But when the message is authentic and comes from the heart, that also people can sense and feel. And it gave me a lot of resolve then to lead the entire supply chain through the change, because I was going through what I just described. But you can imagine every single person going through some shape or form of that emotion in them. And me being able to talk about it, me being able to explain it, me being able to communicate why I was excited about the journey on the Magnum Ice Cream Company became all far more powerful, and people could feel that. And so was, I think for me, a big moment and a big learning as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, just listening to you clearly is, I think it's tangible, the fact that you're authentic and open about it. I think the biggest mistakes that some leaders do is trying to sweep it under the carpet, or trying to ignore it, or try to, I don't know, not talk about it. I mean, that's ultimately, people want to feel heard, they want to feel understood. The context is what it is, but you gotta address it psychologically, because that creates that atmosphere that, okay, we are understood. And I think we underestimate how important that is. And now, to kind of move forward, and we talked a little bit in preparation from this podcast on the excitement part. You mentioned that this is a 5G moment, your own metaphor. So maybe walk us through the exciting part, and what this also laid the ground and the foundation to what you're now building, and what's so exciting about the journey ahead for you.
I mean, so I call it the 5G moment. The scale of work at hand when you build this. We have a unique opportunity to build a brand new company, new processes, new organization construct and design, new systems. You can make it really purpose fit. I think when I say it's the 5G moment, if you look at a company like Unilever, it's got a proud 100-year legacy. And it has been built up over that 100 years. We have some systems that are quite, I don't want to say old, because we keep upgrading our systems, but the philosophy and thinking started decades ago, right? And we've built upon that layer upon layer upon layer. The good side is you have all that legacy and knowledge and institutional know-how. The downside of it is when you build things layer upon layer, you're constantly optimizing. And why do I call it the 5G moment? I come from Africa, as you know, Radu. And what always surprised me is Africa, if you asked anyone, they say, what's the poorest continent in the world? Everyone says, it's Africa. But if you then ask the question and said, okay, so what's the continent that has the highest 5G mobile phone penetration in the world? That answer is also Africa. And the weirdest thing is, you say, how does the poorest continent of the world have the highest penetration of 5G mobile? And that's because they never had the copper cables to begin with. And that was the advantage. In the US, in the Western world, it took a lot longer and still not fully complete, because the cost of getting out of your legacy infrastructure was so high that the investment in the new infrastructure takes time. And why do I call this the 5G moment for the Magnum Ice Cream Company? We are as good as we can be under the Unilever banner today. But tomorrow, when we create a very bespoke operating framework for an ice cream business, when we create bespoke systems that support and drive an ice cream business that is super seasonal, high seasonality, it's got very different dynamics to, let's say, a home care or a personal care or whatever, including the frozen chain and so on. We will be able to leapfrog into designing what we believe is right, from organization structure and design, business processes that we want to do, the technology stack that will enable the functioning of the organization design and the business processes hand in hand. It will not be a one-size-fits-all approach like what we have perhaps from time to time in a Unilever. It will also be we will have a chance to invest in the latest edge thinking. And that's why this is a very unique moment in the Magnum Ice Cream Company. And either we will own the moment and make it happen, or we will not own it and not make it happen. And I think that's up to us to do. But it really is a massive 5G moment, because I think we can leapfrog. We can leapfrog into what we want, we know is the right thing for an ice cream company, and design it from scratch with the latest thinking in mind, and not have this fear of what does it mean in the context of the old asset base. And I think especially when it comes to systems and technology, I think this is a huge moment which we can really create a disproportional advantage for. And I'm excited, scared, and everything about that. It's a thrilling journey. It's a big responsibility. Why am I scared? It's that, I have the responsibility of getting it right, but I'm super excited about it because I think we could transform the future dramatically.
Well said. And you've already been on this journey for 12 months, so maybe let's also talk a little bit. And you were telling me that you've done in the past year more interviews than you ever done in your life, or close to, and then all of this. So talk to us a little bit about how do you even start to make this work? I mean, to maybe share with the audience to understand the complexity of this, when you also are part of an ecosystem that is very mature, like Unilever, and now you're starting to disentangle from that and to be on your own is not as easy as it sounds, as it seems. From talent and people to systems to processes and so on. So maybe tell us a little bit more of the last 12 months.
It's been the most intense 12 months. I can safely say I've never worked harder. I think, to your point, and I was telling you earlier, I've never interviewed as much in my role. To put it in context, I talk about 9,000 roles in the supply chain, but across all the levels in the supply chain, we had 700 roles to recruit for, to stand alone. And I wasn't involved in all 700, but a fair amount. My immediate direct team definitely, but also the senior roles one level below. In some of them, I was call it the final kind of interview round. I've never interviewed more in my career. I've done more interviews in the last 12 months than in all 23 years of prior to that. So I think just the intensity and why is it so intense? You have to still run the business responsibly. We have to do it today. Today matters, tomorrow matters, even day before yesterday mattered. And so that's a full-time job, just running the business in itself. Now, on top of that, you have to de-entangle whilst maintaining business continuity, actually still improving our supply chain performance in the context of ice cream. And then, like I just shared a couple of minutes ago, the whole how do we build for the future and what do we want to do? So it's honestly 2 or 3 jobs all rolled into one. And I think the intensity of work is massive. But I think, what are my lessons? I think you need to be resilient, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And I don't mean spiritual in the context of a higher God or not, because I think everyone has their own spiritual definition. But when I say you need to be in contact with the inner self of you, you need to be resilient in that sense, because things are going to go wrong. You are going to feel the pressure, all of that. But, my lessons have been really make sure, I invested a lot of time with my HR partner on building my top team. And I think the minute you get the top team right, it really is something. It frees you up to get that. You need resilience. And why do I say emotional, physical, mental? You've got to balance your well-being. You are working, despite everything, you are working 14, 15-hour days from time to time. And you're doing that not just for 1 or 2 days at a stretch. You're doing it for weeks on end. And so how you balance your mental energy, your spiritual energy, takes a lot of discipline. You have to have self-discipline. You have to be disciplined on your routine. All of us have families, or, I certainly am working quite a bit, not only for my own professional satisfaction, but also as a responsibility towards my family. And so how do you balance that? And how do you make sure you are not absent at home while still being fully committed at work? I think when you go through this, you really learn some lessons on discipline, resilience, how to make, again, I spoke about my inflection point in that manufacturing role in South Africa, but how do you make decisions with speed, not necessarily perfect and all of the information at hand? And it's a constantly pressurized environment. So how do you lead with calmness in a pressured environment? Because just applying crazy amounts of pressure is not going to take the team forward. Actually, everyone is going through what I've just described. And so, yes, there's a lot of pressure. There's strict deadlines, timelines, because everything is locked. And so you've got to lead with a lot of calmness under that pressure. And I think going through all of that has been, again, I didn't mention it maybe as an inflection point because the job is not yet done, Radu. But certainly if we talk a year or two from now, I would say to you, hey, I've actually got one more inflection point for you, because I've learned a lot in the last year as well. I feel, when you talk about a new S-curve in your journey and development, this is a new S-curve. And so it's a lot of work, I won't lie, but very rewarding at the same time, because you're learning. You are stretching yourself like an elastic rubber band to the max. And in that stretch comes growth, development, new learnings, new thinking, and that's rewarding too at the same time. So it's a little bit of, you lose energy, but you also gain energy from some of these things, and you gotta figure that out for yourself, so that you can manage.
Is there a principle or two that helps you balance and keep this calmness? Because I think I'm asking from a perspective that's, again, makes a difference between a great leader and a manager.
Yeah.
The managers would pass on the stress and would pass on the pressure to their teams, and that typically doesn't help. You seem to have a certain calmness that comes across very clearly from your tone. So are there certain principles or, I don't know, thoughts or life lessons? I mean, you've mentioned some already that help you have that.
I think I boil it down to the most basic thing that I even tell my kids. So I always say, okay, have you put in your best effort? If the answer to that is yes, the outcome's the outcome. Sometimes you're not, as much as we all like to think we are 100% in control of the outcome, if we're very honest with ourselves, we're not 100% in control of anything. Maybe 90%. There's 10% of all kinds of factors that influence the final outcome. And I think how I lead with it, Radu, is I always say, okay, never be shy on the effort that's required to do what needed to be done. But don't solely judge yourself by the outcome. And that doesn't mean that hitting targets isn't important to me. I mean, I'm super ambitious, I'm super driven. It's not that, and I take accountability, personal accountability, very seriously. If I say I'm going to do something by such and such a date and time, that's important. That's my credibility. That's my brand reputation on the line. So it's not that I'm soft on those things, but I have a certain sense of realism that says, if I've given it my best, and I know I've given it my best, and the outcome is whatever the outcome is, tomorrow's another day. Wake up, we'll figure it out, and get going. It's not the end of the world if you haven't reached the outcome. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing that helps me lead with calmness under pressure, because I evaluate the situation for what it is and then say, okay, we may not like it, but this is where we are. What do we now do? And dwelling on why are we where we are? Why the hell didn't we succeed? What's going wrong? Of course, you have to do all of that so that you don't repeat the same mistakes again, but don't dwell on it. Learn from it and move. It's this constant thing of moving. And so I boil it down to what I tell my kids. I don't judge my kids by the results on their scorecard or their report card. I judge them saying, did I think throughout the year you put in the effort? If my answer to that is I thought they put in the effort and were there, the outcome is the outcome. It is what it is. But if you know you didn't do your best, that's the real thing. Then you got to be self-critical and challenging on yourself to say, I didn't do my best, so what the hell happened? And I think for me, I boil it down to that level of simplicity. It's not maybe profound, but it's really that simple, Radu, in terms of leading with calm under deep pressure.
I
There's
think it's
also no one
profound.
else who can do it. You must know when you're there, there's nobody else. So you got to just sit there and do it.
I think it is profound. And I think we as human beings, we are overcomplicating things. I think it's profound and common sense at the same time. But common sense is not common practice. And therein lies the issue that most of us have with actually applying it in practice. And maybe to end with this question, also what you described as an environment, as a challenge, as the magnitude of the transformation and of the journey that you're in and ahead of you, I expect or suspect that the type of people you need may not be exactly the type of people perhaps that would fit Unilever, or would fit a more structured corporate environment to a certain extent. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I guess what I'm asking is, are there certain attributes that you're looking for, generally speaking, not linked to a specific function, but generally speaking, that would strive more in the journey that you're at today?
I think people that are up for learning and growing, if you are here to say, hey, I just want to do continuous improvement, then when you go through a demerger process like what we are going, where the ice cream business is being demerged out of Unilever into the Magnum ice cream company, may not be the most ideal environment. You've got to thrive on challenge. You've got to learn. You've got to be able to deal with some level of ambiguity, because not everything will have perfect answers in front of you. And so I actually think, by the way, in the supply chain, it's not been maybe as hard as maybe some of the other functions. And why do I say that? I think in the supply chain, no 2 days are ever the same for any supply chain professional in any company. And I think most supply chain people in the role, because they're like, okay, I know I'm going to get an unknown issue thrown at me and I'm going to have to deal with it and respond. And I think provided you have that mindset, I think you can go through this in a supply chain context, in a demerger, because I think most supply chain people grow up in that kind of environment where no 2 days are ever the same. But I think, you also need, what I've realized, you do need people, with deep supply chain expertise, is what I would say, because you're making decisions. You're making decisions on planning or on logistics or on order and transport management, or how are you going to do commodities and risk management in your procurement systems. You can't make some of these decisions if you don't have the content knowledge. And I don't mean content knowledge meaning you need to be an ice cream expert. Knowing a little bit about ice cream will always help, don't get me wrong. But you need at least the content matter expert. You need to know what you're doing in procurement or planning or logistics or manufacturing, whatever the field is. And so, the kind of people I'm looking at is with deep expertise. I'm sure you do this in your role, Radu. You find people who flip-flop companies a lot in their career, short stints, lots of things, or short stints in different roles. The thing with short stints is, I think you never finish the job and see the problems. And I think the real learning comes is when you finish something to its ultimate, and actually, even if it's a success of a project, you'll always learn at the end of the project that there are some new issues that have been created. And actually, I am looking for people that have been through that journey, because then you have the right content knowledge and will be the best placed and equipped to make whatever decision is thrown your way with the greatest amount of judgment and care. And I think for me, that's quite important.
Super. Well, look, Sandeep, it's been a pleasure. I will pay you the compliment that it is very clear and obvious that you're an authentic leader. And I think in the world that we live in today, where most things are vanilla, and not the type of good vanilla of a Magnum ice cream, but in the type of that just same old tastes like nothing. It's just words that mean nothing. I think it makes you stand out, and I think people would clearly sense it. And I think you want to follow somebody that you believe in, and you want to follow a path. that is authentic and clear. So I think that definitely sets you apart. Plus, I do believe that on the market today in the food business, there's not a lot of stories like the story that you're writing as we speak. This is an incredible journey. I mean, anybody that joins you will learn tremendously. Sure, it's not been written. The chapters are being written, so the end of the book has not yet been defined. But just speaking to you today, I'm pretty sure that is going to be a happy ending. And then in 2 years, you'll tell me one more inflection point in your career.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. It's been great, Radu. I mean, you and I have known each other a while, so it's been an easy conversation. But yeah, I genuinely feel privileged to be in this position. It's a privilege and a great responsibility. And it's an amazing joyride. It's got its ups and downs. I won't lie about that. But the ups are phenomenal. And if you like a roller coaster thrill like me, then I'm living for the ups, knowing that there'll be some downs in the journey. But the ups will be exhilarating and super high, and that's what keeps it going. So yeah, thanks.
Love it. Super. All right, Sandeep, thanks for joining us.
Take care, Radu. Good to chat.
Once again, this is Radu Palamariu. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you're listening it on iTunes, Spotify, or any other channel, we'd love if you leave us a review. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.